It's Bill Harlow, host of this edition of the Cipher Briefs Cover Stories podcast. Doug Waller is a longtime journalist who spent a couple decades covering the White House, Pentagon, State Department, and CIA, first for Newsweek and later for Time magazine. In recent years, he's focused on writing deeply researched and critically acclaimed books about military, espionage, the OSS, and the CIA. His latest book, The Determined Spy, The Turbulent Life and Times of CIA pioneer Frank Wisner, has just been released. Let's talk with him about it. Doug Waller, welcome to the Cover Stories podcast.
Good to be here.
Before we dive into a discussion of The Determined Spy, I probably should start with a disclosure. You and I met decades ago when you were covering national security for news magazines and I was a government spokesman. Mm-hmm. If I had known all this time later I'd be asking you questions, I probably would have been more forthcoming and expansive in my answers, but we'll just have to work around that, I guess.
You were always a good spokesman, that's for sure.
I didn't pay you to say that, but thank you very much. And, you know, it might be useful to our younger listeners to know that back in the day, news magazines like Time and Newsweek, where you worked, were enormously important in the nation's news landscape. It's where readers went to get in-depth reporting and context about major issues. And that seems to be the same skill that you brought into your book writing, or in-depth reporting in journalism, in the stories that you tell.
Oh, thank you. And I've enjoyed tackling the book projects. I did a lot of those in my spare time, and now I do it full time.
And you've written books about submarines, naval aviators, commandos, but recently your focus has been heavily on espionage and intelligence matters. I wonder what drew you to those topics.
Well, I covered the CIA for a while. In fact, I think you were at the CIA when I was covering it. I became intrigued by biographical subjects, or I looked for biographical subjects who were controversial in the intelligence area. And so the book I'm just about to publish now is the third in what I guess you'd call a trilogy of books. The first one was a biography I did of General William Wild Bill Donovan, who headed up Franklin Roosevelt's spy service during World War II, and who was a man who had commanded a large, loyal following, and also was very controversial. A lot of people in the government thought he was as big a threat to the U.S. as Adolf Hitler was. So there weren't many people neutral on him. After that, I wrote a book on the 4 CIA directors who had served under Donovan in World War II, who later became CIA directors. That was Allen Dulles, Richard Helms, Bill Colby, and Bill Casey. Again, 4 controversial figures. They made great biographical subjects. And the subject of my latest book is a guy named Frank Wisner, who was head of the CIA's clandestine service in the 1950s. Again, another controversial character, and I've enjoyed doing these type of portrayals. Very, very interesting subjects.
Well, your background in in-depth reporting certainly shines through in the book. And it weighs in at over 500 pages. And normally when I see a book that long, I open it with a sigh. But I've got to tell you, by the time I got to the end of The Determined Spy, I was a little sad to see the story end. There's just so much rich information in it. It's a great story. Mm-hmm. And we can't do justice to a 500-page book in a 30-minute podcast, but we'll try to scratch the surface. And before we get into the substance of the book, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your sources and methods. How you went about reporting this book, because it's never easy to report on any book, but particularly this kind of book, it had to be particularly challenging, I would think.
Well, it was challenging. Actually, one reason was I was doing the research for it during the COVID epidemic. So there were a lot of archives that were closed, and I had to contact archivists by phone or email to get them to ship me material. What I discovered was that there is a huge amount of information on the CIA's own website. There must be millions of pages of documents that they've declassified during the 1950s and even before. And I had the historians at the CIA help me traverse that material through what's called CREST, the CIA research tool. And I downloaded tens of thousands of pages of documents from the agency itself. Turns out the State Department, through its Foreign Relations of the U.S. Series called the FRUs, published and has released a ton of material from the 1950s, from the National Security Council and from the White House back then. The FBI has released a lot of material. And the Wisner family cooperated with me. His three sons, I spent, something like 50 hours interviewing them over the course of several years. And they provided me with a lot of family papers. Wisner's own personal papers are at the University of Virginia, which fortunately opened up while I was doing the research. So I was able to get material there. Out at Stanford University, the Hoover Institution, they had a lot of information there. I flew out there to look at their stuff. But a lot of it really was online. I probably copied down about 40 or 50,000 pages of documents that I collected on Wisner and what he was doing during a very tumultuous tour with the CIA.
Well, there's really a wealth of information in there, and Wisner certainly was a remarkable person. It's rare to find somebody whose life is both blessed and cursed in such large measures. But Wisner knew tremendous good fortune, was a talented athlete, scholar, lawyer, naval officer, and more. But he also suffered some tremendous personal and professional setbacks, all of which we'll talk about. But as we get started, I wonder if you could just give us a little bit about his early bio. What was his life like as a young man?
He was born in 1909 in Laurel, Mississippi, which is southeast of Jackson, Mississippi. He was a son of the South. His father was a very prominent lumberman. He was a very precocious child, fairly rambunctious, academically uneven in grade school. His father lobbied to get him into the University of Virginia, where he really excelled. He became a nationally starred track star at UVA and graduated with the honors from the University of Virginia Law School. From there, he went to New York and joined a venerable Wall Street law firm, one of whose young attorneys in the past had been Franklin Roosevelt. And soon he was taking on top cases there. But just as soon he became bored with legal work. He could see war on the horizon, World War II war. In fact, he toured Nazi Germany in 1938, and could see for himself the threat that Adolf Hitler posed. So 6 months before, I believe it was 6 months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, he joined the Navy as lieutenant junior grade. Ended up being just as bored with that work, too. He was basically pushing papers for an obscure intelligence unit in New York that the Navy ran. Then he heard about an organization called the Office of Strategic Services, run by William Donovan, who was had been a prominent New York attorney, a prominent Republican too, ran for governor of New York in 1932, but lost. And Wisner had socialized with Donovan, and he decided to join the OSS. Wisner kind of fit the mold of the type of spies that Donovan was looking for. He wanted to recruit America's best and brightest. He would also take some people with very specialized skills, like forgers, lockpicks, race car drivers, chemists that could brew up truth drugs for him, inventors that could concoct exotic weapons. Wisner, though he wasn't an Ivy Leaguer, and Donovan gravitated toward them. He had worked in Donovan's home turf, which was Wall Street. And so he joined the OSS, went for a quickie, I guess, 2-week spy course in Maryland at a vacant school there. Was called the E2 training site, where he learned the very basics of tradecraft and spying, setting up safe houses, communicating through letter drops, coded messages. He learned about exotic OSS weapons like pistols with silencers and the K pill that you could slip into an enemy agent's drink and knock him out. How to fight dirty, gouging somebody's eyes or chopping below the Adam's apple to kill them instantly. And from there, obviously he didn't have enough training to be a full-fledged spy, but he had enough for what the OSS wanted. They found Wisner to be somebody who could think on his feet, had a good sound head on his shoulders, and they sent him to Cairo to help with the intelligence output there. Cairo is a key station for OSS spying in the region. But as any good intelligence operation knows, the spying doesn't do you much good if you don't get it into analytical reports and get it to the person who actually needs the information. And that's what Wisner did. From there, he went to Turkey and to salvage a wrecked operation there run by Lanning Packy McFarland, who was a savings and loan businessman, an old buddy of Donovan's, who was completely out of his depth in intelligence. In fact, the first time Wisner met him was in a Istanbul nightclub where Packy came out with a line of Turkish chorus girls singing "Boo Boo Baby, I'm a Spy," which
cover, yeah.
Which horrified Wisner. It took him about 3 or 4 months to reform the Turkish operation, send Packy home and clean it up. From there, he went to Romania, which was switching sides. We could see that the Germans were losing, and so they decided to team up with the British, the Americans, and the Soviets. And Wisner set up his own station there to collect intelligence not only on the Germans who were fleeing, but also the Russians who were pouring in. And he did a terrific job. After the German surrender in 1945, in May 1945, he moved into the OSS mission that was being set up in Wiesbaden, Germany, by Alan Dulles, who was another star of the OSS who ran their all-important Bern station in Bern, Switzerland. And it was there that he really got there, and also in Romania, he got a taste of the brutal Soviet tactics that were underway. And he came back home from that experience with believing that was probably one of the best years of his life that he spent, the most exciting years, and also where he developed a deep hatred of the Russians.
So he really became a cold warrior with that experience of
he
killing
did.
the Russians.
He did, and he was really kind of ahead of other people in Washington. Keep in mind, the Russians were our allies in World War II. Wisner clearly saw them as our future enemy after World War II.
You also write in the book quite a bit about his family. They played a large role in his story and in your book. His wife was a major figure in Washington and became known as part of the Georgetown set. Wisner seemed to travel in circles where he kept bumping into people who were then famous or would later become famous, and all that sort of molds together into his overall story.
Yeah, he was a master networker. Keep in mind, he always wanted to operate in the background. Bill Colby once had a very famous line. Somebody asked him one time, what's the ideal spy? And he said, the one you don't see, which is what Wisner was. He didn't want to be seen or heard, but he was a good networker behind the scenes. So they moved to a home in Georgetown. They became, as you mentioned, part of what's called the Georgetown set. And these were a group of people, senior people living in Washington, secretaries of defense, top State Department officials, and top media officials like Joseph and Stuart Alsop, or Phil Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post. Polly was just as much a networker. She was extremely close friends with Catherine Graham, Phil Graham's very influential wife. And Wisner used those contacts, particularly the media contacts, to plant stories and try to manipulate media stories that would favor the U.S. government. He didn't leak to reporters, but he certainly tried to manage them.
And I probably leaped a little bit ahead of the tale here, but after the war, he eventually, fairly quickly, was brought to Washington to help set up some of these beginning stages of a national intelligence service. And it struck me, it was sort of make it up as you go along from reading your book. It wasn't a clear plan on how all these structure would come together.
Oh, there was no plan. He first headed up what was called, and had a bland sounding name, called the Office of Policy Coordination, which this was under the Truman administration. The Truman White House basically gave him pretty much a blank check to set up a political warfare operation against the Soviets, using the same tactics the Soviet used, same dirty tricks if need be. By 1952, Wisner was in command of somewhere about 6,000 spies, covert operation contract agents, saboteurs scattered all over the world. 6,000 men and women. That's an awful lot of people. Sure. You're talking about a brigade's worth of covert warriors that he ran. But this was all new, and he had what I guess you'd call a batting average. You know, he had some good hits, but a lot of strikeouts too. His propaganda operations in Europe, some of them were very successful, or at least it unnerved the Soviets. His operations, though, to infiltrate agents into the East Bloc countries, a good many of them failed miserably. In Asia, the same thing. Edward Lansdale, who worked for him in the Philippines, enjoyed huge successes in combating the Huk communist guerrillas there. But there were hundreds of other CIA men that poured into Asia during the Korean War to try and infiltrate into North Korea and China, who got wrapped up, had a real tough time of it. Were basically ignorant of Asian culture and how to set up operations there.
So he was an early practitioner of covert action, which many presidents sort of are attracted to because it's easier than diplomacy and more cost-effective than warfare in their minds anyway. And he had, as you say, some successes and some failures, including some helping to overthrow some governments overseas, which may have appeared to be successes at the time and may have a different record down the road. One was Iran. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that operation. Yeah,
Iran was basically, there are two operations that were basically home runs for him, you'd say. In Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, was developing fairly significant enemies. Number one, the British, because he nationalized Iran's oil production, took it away from the British. Number two, senior generals and officers and monarchists who backed the Shah of Iran. And number three, the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State. Allen Dulles at the time was CIA director. And Frank Wisner, who saw and worried that the Russians to the north were coming at the doorstep, ready to intervene in this unstable country. Mossadegh was kind of a quirky kind of guy. He liked to sometimes pretend to be fainting. I'm not sure why. He held a lot of official government meetings in his bedroom in his gray pajamas. And he managed to, as I say, alienate a lot of people. And finally, Wisner's operation sent in a guy named Kermit Roosevelt, who was Teddy Roosevelt's grandson, who helped and egged along the opposition forces in Iran to overthrow Mossadegh. A year later, another leader, third world leader who ran afoul of the Dulles brothers and Eisenhower was Jacobo Arbenz, the president of Guatemala, who he was a young president in his late 30s, and was a neutral on the Cold War. He would not kowtow to the U.S. And the Eisenhower administration at that time, and the Dulles brothers too, would not put up with neutrals. You couldn't be in between. You were either for the U.S. or you were against it. No in-betweeners were allowed. And Arbenz, who had instituted a number of economic reforms in his country, and also tolerated a very, very small communist political faction in the country, was someone who was deemed had to go by Washington. And Wisner personally oversaw that operation that ended up ousting Arbenz. In both these two cases, Dwight Eisenhower was absolutely delighted with the results, because here he had bested Moscow in two countries with very cheap operations. It was a heck of a lot cheaper to send in Wisner's covert warriors than it would have been U.S. military forces to topple the regime. Over the long term, however, they ended up being disastrous results, not only for the two countries, but also for the U.S. The Shah of Iran turned out to be a tyrant and was overthrown in 1979 by Islamic fundamentalists who set up Iran basically as a base camp for international terrorists. In Guatemala, Arbenz was followed by a number of brutal dictators. Government-backed death squads killed something like 200,000 Guatemalan peasants, and disappeared. I think it was something like 40,000 more. Horrible legacy for that country. But again, look in 1953 and 1954, Eisenhower was thrilled with these results, and Wisner was kind of a secret hero in Washington for overseeing them.
Now, running at about the same time, though, Wisner was starting to demonstrate increasingly mental health difficulties in what would now be called bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. How do these symptoms manifest themselves in his work and in his life?
Well, Trace, and I had to spend an awful lot of time on this subject. In fact, I consulted with a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and they gave me several thousand pages of journal articles on the subject, so I could kind of get up to speed on it. Wisner suffered from bipolar disorder. Back then, it was called manic depression because it combined mania's intense frenzy with depression's just awful misery. How he got the disease, nobody really knows. His mother was believed to have suffered from depression, although it was never actually diagnosed in her. As a kid, he was a very, very busy kid, and there was a question whether did he have ADHD or he was just a busy little guy. When his comrades, World War II comrades, thought they saw it during his service there because of his almost a religious fervor as an anti-communist. But he had an awful lot to hate with the Soviet brutal repression in Romania and Germany that he saw. When he was in Washington, he exhibited symptoms that psychiatrists call, this is in the early years, hypomania, which is where you have increased energy and enthusiasm and charm, and everything's very, very high octane. But in official Washington, that's
prized commodity.
Yeah, a prized commodity and everything. It wasn't till the mid to late 1950s that there were he had instances where he started losing his cool, bursting out with complaints about being overloaded, venting to other people. Again, though, friends thought it was just he was in a high pressure cooker job, and it was a function of that. It was in the late 1950s when he was overseas in the Soviets invaded Hungary to suppress a revolt there. And the British and the French, with the help of the Israelis, sent military forces in to take over the Suez Canal, which President Nasser of Egypt had nationalized. That Wisner was bouncing from one CIA station to another in Europe during that time, basically losing control, going from meeting to meeting, setting, ranting and raving against colleagues, trying to micromanage things, sending back cables that made no sense, and everybody thought he'd had a nervous breakdown. Which he had. The disease, the genetic time bomb inside him finally detonated then. And he got back to the U.S. It subsided for a while, then came back, and finally his wife, Polly, and friends talked him into going to a mental institution near Baltimore, where he spent more than 170 days. A lot of it time taking shock treatments, shock therapy, which seemed to work for a while, but it was only a temporary fix. It finally became too much for him, and he resigned from the CIA in 1961.
And he had, after that, some moments of clarity and normalcy, and then the illness returned.
It did. And keep in mind, there was no effective treatment for bipolar disorder back then. Lithium, which is one of the treatments, didn't come online until about 5 years after Wisner died. Shock therapy was actually fairly effective, and contrary to the image that it's a brutal type of therapy, it actually worked for him, and he felt a lot better. But this awful disease kept returning, and his he could see it was relentless and untreated. It was just completely overcame him. So in 1965, while he was out at his farm, he found a shotgun in a closet and pointed at his head and killed himself. He was only 56 years old at the time. It was a tragic ending, really, for a pioneer for the CIA.
He really was a trailblazer in every respect. Mm-hmm. What's your overall take about it, on his contributions to clandestine intelligence and his overall career? And What are we to think about his contributions?
Well, he did pioneer the covert warfare capability in the U.S. government. When Allen Dulles was director of the CIA, Wisner was his top deputy for the clandestine service, and it included not only covert operations but also intelligence gathering too. That came under his wing also. Wisner not only pioneered covert action, trying to affect governments worldwide. He also basically trailblazed the CIA's what they call liaison operations, where they work with other intelligence services around the world to gather information. And he was in on the very founding of that capability, which is one of the things that defines the United States as a superpower, is this worldwide intelligence service that right now has a reach everywhere in the world. They've had their successes and failures, but there's really no other world-class intelligence service, maybe save for the Soviet Union. I'm sorry, maybe save for Russia. Wisner was, I've said it, told the audience, Wisner was in on the founding, or in on the first Cold War. We're now in the second Cold War, I think. And many of the operations and principles that he put into play 70 years ago, are still at work today.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Again, the title of the book is The Determined Spy. We recommend you check it out, and also check out the review of the book in the Cipher Brief by former CIA senior officer Mike Sulik, who gives it our highest 4 trench coat rating. Doug Waller, thank you for joining us today.
It's good to be with you.